It's time to let your sports opinions fly for the main event. A 7-team elimination match to decide the District 4 3A Championship. Presented to you live by PilotPointBearcats.com. This 10-week match has been sanctioned by the University of Interscholastic League. Our celebrity referee for the District 4 3A show is none other than the daytime psychology professor, Texas high school football storyteller, North Texas insider, and DFW Inside High School Sports, the most feared member of the Texas high school mafia, the one, the only, small-town Digsy, the professor,
Welcome to the regional semifinals Thanksgiving edition of the District 4 3A Report. I am the Professor Matt Diggs. Thank you for tuning in for yet another week of the report. And this week, as promised last week, we have 3 teams from District 4 3A. 3 of the 4 teams are headed into the playoffs, and that means 2 of them have to play each other this week. But before we get to what we're going to next week, we got to know where we came from last week. As we always start out, we will look at what happened last week, and we'll start out with Whitesboro and Dalhart, and it was pretty much the domination that we thought we were going to see from Whitesboro. They defeat the Dalhart Wolves 65-15, and again, just right down the road, this game was 44-7 at halftime. 58-7 at the end of the third quarter, and we had game management in full effect in the fourth quarter. Game management, if you're new to the District 4 3A report, that's just my term for when you get the JV in there and then the second teamers just to keep the score down. That's, game management. It's just you've won the game, you don't want to get your players hurt, you move on. And it was a great game by Mac Harper. Don't recall, and I'm sure somebody can correct me, I don't recall him being more efficient than he was in this game. 15 of 18 for 248 yards and 2 touchdowns. So only have 3 incomplete passes. It's just, again, you want to be peaking at the right time. And Mac Harper just had a fantastic game. Grayson Ledbetter only had to have 6 carries to get his 111 yards, and half of them ended up for scores. Again, that's a very efficient rate as well. When you carry the ball 6 times and 3 of them, you are looking at the goalpost afterward. Carter Sluter, everybody was getting in on it. Mac Harper carried 5 for 46. Carter Sluter 2 for 14. Max Parker 6 for 84, and Colin Phillips. I like Max Parker and Colin Phillips, but game management's happening when they're getting when they get as many carries as Grayson and Mac do. On the receiving side, it was great to see our friend of the District 4 3A report, Clay Hermes, back in the stat sheet. Second most receptions for Whitesboro, 4 for 38. We got to get you in the end zone. I need you and Coach Fagan need to work out something when I come to the game. That's a little spoiler alert. I'm going to Paradise in Whitesboro. So if you wonder who won that Paradise and Shallow Water game, I've just completely spoiled it for you. I will not spoil the ending of The Walking Dead for you. I saw they had their series finale on Sunday, and the reason I won't is because I don't watch the show, so I don't even know what happened. I got some stuff spoiled for me, but I didn't even know what it meant. But over here on my Twitter feed, somebody was retweeting goodbye to this person. I'm like, I don't even know who it is, but I'd be real mad if I was watching that and I got on social media and I saw that person got killed off. And I guess if somebody getting killed off in the season finale spoils something for you, that's what the District 4 3A report is here to do, is to ruin your Thanksgiving plans. Instead of watching zombies get killed, you should be watching District 4 3A football. Everybody needs to be coming out to Prosper this week anyway and check out the games between the 2 teams in our District 4 3A report. Brett Donaldson, 2 for 13. Jay Sanders, 3 for 59 and a touchdown. Carter Sluter was the big target of the game, 5 for 124 and a touchdown. And Max Parker rounded it out with a catch for 14 yards. So another 500-yard game, and we're starting to see with Whitesboro that's pretty much kind of their new normal. Is this 400 to 500-yard offense in very efficient ways. I mean, they only had 40 plays according to the stat sheet, 18 throws and 22 runs. So, an incredibly efficient night. Dalhart, what can you say about Dalhart? Again, what really impresses me with Whitesboro is that defensive arc we're seeing. They're continuing to get better every single week. And Dalhart, when you have a sophomore quarterback against Whitesboro, a team that's peaking, they're going to have a field day, and they pretty much did. Kyler Reed, a kid who will probably, we may be hearing in the District 4 3A report as a junior or senior, is only going to get better. 17 of 27 for 175 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. You saw Whitesboro did not have the interceptions, and they've been playing very clean football, especially with the first team. But Whitesboro ball hawking on the Dalhart defense and did a great job on the Dalhart offense and did a great job. The running game, Kyler was pretty much the go-to. He had 22 carries, but only 32 yards. Mitchell Bailey, the change of pace back, found the ball 5 for 33 and a touchdown for Dalhart. But we know that touchdown came in the fourth quarter in as we got to the game management time of the programming. So again, 61 yards rushing and 175 yards passing, and again, a lot of that came in the third and fourth quarter. Whitesboro, man, we know that Whitesboro's got the offense, but the defense is catching up with the team getting on with the program, and I was pretty impressed. Another team I was pretty impressed by were those Paradise Panthers, who hung on to beat Shallow Water 17-14. That game was 17-7 at halftime, and Paradise did not score anything in the second half, and they continued on. And this game was a game that, although I had a feeling that Paradise was going to win, just because we talked about the lack of calibration with West Texas teams and really needing to see that calibration before we could put a lot of stock into the teams. Paradise just took care of business, but it wasn't a dominating performance. Obviously, the Shallow Water was a fantastic team, state ranked at points. They beat Bushland, so we know that Paradise, third place team in District 4 3A against Shallow Water, the first place team in District 2 3A. That was going to be a very competitive game, and I think that the statistics bore it out. And really, Paradise got shut down in many ways. Austin Iglesias was not able to run and throw crazily. He only had 94 yards passing. They had 149 yards as a team rushing. Shallow Water was able to throw the ball pretty effectively, 200 yards passing and 87 yards rushing. So the rushing game, Brooks Carter for Shallow Water, we just had a brain reboot right there. You got to see it. The computer broke down all of a sudden because I was looking at the name Brooks Carter, but it just did not come out. So Brooks Carter, the quarterback for Shallow Water, had a pretty good day. Passing the ball, 12 of 22, did have an interception, and this game was really marred by turnovers. You don't expect that with Paradise. But they did, they had they had 2 turnovers themselves, 2 fumbles, whereas Shallow Water, they lost 2 fumbles, but they had 4 fumbles. And even when you don't lose a fumble, that's obviously a play killer at the very least when you have 4 fumbles, and they also had an interception. So Paradise did win the turnover battle. Austin Iglesias rushed 13 times for 60 yards and passed 7 for 19 for 94. We talked about Brooks Carter with his 200-yard passing game. And really, I saw on the stat sheet, and this is kind of what I wanted to see, Paradise is back at full health, it appears. You saw Will Johnson rush the ball 7 times for 32 yards. Leo Hernandez, a senior who's a big bruising back, only had 3 carries for 2 yards, wasn't a big factor in the game. because of the sophomore Isaiah Jennings is kind of coming into his own. When you get some sophomores time in the rushing game, sometimes you find something you like, and we saw it this week with South Oak Cliff that sometimes the team gets better as those as the youngsters get to practice and play and get better and get that confidence. Sometimes an injury opens up opportunity for players. Isaiah Jennings, I think, is taking advantage of that for the Paradise Panthers. 17-14, Paradise hung on. A very back and forth game. Possessions, not a lot of plays, but Paradise was able to quote unquote upset Shallow Water. I don't consider it an upset, but I know a lot of people around the state do. But I just think that speaks to the power of District 4 3A. Jim Ned and Bushland pretty much happened as I expected as well. Bushland with a 28-10 victory over Jim Ned. Jim Ned had a good job rushing the ball. They ran the ball 48 times for 230 yards, as you would expect from Jim Ned. Troy Duran, their quarterback that we talked about last week, had to throw a bit more than he was used to, and he threw 2 interceptions. So whenever you start to lose that turnover battle, obviously that plays a pretty big factor into things. He rushed the ball 24 times for 113 yards and a touchdown. Trey Hicks, 12 carries for 57 yards. Braden Shipman, 8 carries for 52 yards for Jim Ned. Bushland, in some ways, we've been talking about Dawson Jaco for weeks now. When we had our deep dive into Bushland, we introduced some of these players and Dawson Jaco and Ivan Soto and kind of what they've been doing. Then they promptly lose to Shallow Water, of course, as things happen in the District 4 3A curse. But they did not get a lot of rushing yardage against Jim Ned, which I think, as we're going to talk about matchups here in a little bit, do play a role into my thoughts into that game. But Dawson Jaco, again, had a fantastic passing game, and I think that will also weigh into the Brock analysis as well. He went 16 for 22, not quite as efficient as Mac, but again, it's one of the more efficient games I've seen this year with 4 touchdowns. Baylor King caught 2 of those touchdowns, 4 for 89. And then Ivan Soto, although he did not get going in the traditional running game, some of those little quick dumps in the flat to keep the defense honest did work out for them. He had 5 catches for 64 yards and 2 touchdowns. Cole Purcell was the other receiver of note, 5 carries and 51 yards. This was a game that was really marred in some ways by penalties. It'll be interesting to see because sometimes you just get a crew that calls everything, and sometimes you get a crew that's very conservative. It's like a political thing. I've seen it on both sides. I know some crews pride themselves on only calling the most obvious things, and sometimes you have other crews that will call every little holding, have a very broad view of what defensive pass interference is, offensive pass interference, and holding. We saw 12 penalties for 100 yards from Jim Ned and 14 penalties for 115 yards from Bushland. So that's certainly something that would not translate well in the third round of the playoffs. Each team had 2 turnovers, so that was ultimately a wash. Jim Ned got out on them early, got an opening field goal, but Bushland with 21 points in the second quarter. Kind of as we were going to talk about with Paradise and Whitesboro round 1, that second quarter was pretty much all they needed to take the victory. Ended up being 28-10 after a 21-10 halftime performance from Bushland. So, and then our last game of the week was Brock versus Muleshoe. Again, another dominant performance, just like we saw game management out of Whitesboro. Plenty of game management was going on with Muleshoe, although Muleshoe, with a kickoff return and an early flurry, had the score 50-13 at halftime, and it was 13. I think it was 21-13 at one point, if I remember the play-by-play right. But it was 50-13 at halftime. I received some intelligence that our friends in Muleshoe were actually a little bit mad at Brock, and I know that a lot of the District 4 3A fans who heard the coach give the little rant on his post-game show after they lost to Gunter have a little bit of adversity and a little bit of a problem with the confidence of Brock. Apparently, the Brock commentators were very liberal in discussing the fact that Brock was now playing their JV team and how their JV team was still running up yards against Muleshoe, and they were apparently, as the rumor mill has it, asked to please tone that down by somebody associated with Muleshoe, whether it was a coach or a media official, whatever the case may be. Apparently, they were asked about that. Brock had 515 yards total on 60 plays, whereas Muleshoe had 115 yards on 50 plays. So almost 8 yards a play for Brock, a little over 8, and only 2 yards a play for Muleshoe, including negative yardage overall in the rushing game. Pretty clean game for Brock in the big picture. They did have a turnover. Muleshoe had 3 turnovers. You see the penalties were big on Brock, 13 for 120 yards, and whereas for Muleshoe it was only 4 for 25. A lot of times in blowouts, you definitely see penalties called more frequently on the leading team as opposed to the trailing team, just to kind of equalize it. Again, it shouldn't be that way, but you definitely see some officiating where that happens. Muleshoe, Nathan Martins threw 12 for 29 for 132 yards, 3 interceptions, and 2 touchdowns. Daniel Sianes, 12 carries for 32 yards. Nathan Martins getting sacked, tried to rush the ball 6 times for a negative 48 yards, which again are usually sacks and how they record those, which ended up being a negative 17 yards total for Muleshoe. And you're really seeing Brock playing defensively, especially against the run, at a very high level right now. Tyler Moody had 13 carries for 13 of 19 for 159 yards, 3 touchdowns and an interception. And then pretty much as we mentioned, a whole litany of people rushed the ball. Just a quick count, it looks like 11 people rushed the ball at some point for Brock in that game. Brett Tutter, 13 carries for 153 yards and 3 touchdowns. This is the third or fourth straight week that we're seeing Brett Tutter, very much like his resurgence in the playoffs last year, that this year he was not used as much. You saw Reed Watkins as kind of the primary back, and then Brett Tutter, only touched the ball a couple of times, and now Brett Tutter is really asserting his dominance in the playoffs. Over to almost 12 yards a carry and 3 touchdowns. Reed Watkins, not a bad night at all. 8 carries for 79 yards and a touchdown. And then Dash Lindsay, 5 carries for 47. And then down the line, again, quite a few people got into the act. Tyler Moody only carried 2 times for 2 yards. Receiving, Carson Finney was the most popular target, 5 for 69. A very nice, see what I did there, game for Carson Finney with 2 touchdowns. Colt Matlock had 1 catch for 32 yards and a touchdown. Obviously, a touchdown pass. Reed Watkins, 3 receptions for 20 yards. Jet Jones, 1 for 16. And our guy, Jackson Hart, 1 for 14. And Zach Brewster, 2 for 8. So, again, just a very dominant performance. But again, Brock beats up on bad teams. You know that? I mean, obviously, we're not talking about blowing them out. There was no mismanagement of things. They didn't try to run it up. Obviously, you score as much as you can before halftime. I saw Tolar against Marlins this past week, and they put up 50 at halftime too. That's certainly, you have some level of playing. Sometimes in the second quarter, if you're in the 70s, you'll start to pull a little bit off the gas. But in the big picture, I think that Brock is looking good in their games. But when they're better than a team, they are able to really put it on a team. And I think Brock being better than Muleshoe is a little bit misleading. Obviously, in the second round of the playoffs, just the way that the matchups went, they earned the easier route, and they got the easier route in this game with a 57-20 victory over Muleshoe. So that leads us to 2 games left in the District 4 3A Region 1 bracket. And obviously the District 4 3A report is very blessed to know that we are guaranteed, no matter what happens in Bushland versus Brock, one of team will be in the regional finals, which means y'all are stuck with me at least one more week. So I can just go ahead and cash that check before it comes in, because I get to have a District 4 3A report for you guys. I'm not getting a check. I'm just, it's a metaphor, hyperbole, if you will. Some English teachers rolling their eyes right now saying, Diggs, that doesn't mean what you think it means. But our two games this week are Whitesboro versus Paradise and Bushland versus Brock. You get a wide range. A couple weeks ago, I taught about the id, the ego, and the superego, and now we're getting into some of the differences between hyperbole and metaphors and exaggeration and onomatopoeia and all kinds of fun stuff. So always a learning experience here at the District 4 3A report. So Whitesboro and Paradise and Bushland versus Brock. And we've seen Whitesboro and Paradise, but it is a completely different game than it was the first time. Even though it was more at the end of the season as opposed to the beginning of the season. And it's hard to beat a team two times in one season. And that's kind of a metaphor that you hear frequently teams say. It's hard to beat a team two times. But what makes this game, in my opinion, even more different than it was previously is the fact that that was that rain game, if you remember that game, where it was just driving rain, bad conditions, just not the kind of game that you would, not the kind of conditions you would want to see. This Friday, our weather forecast is like in the 60s at 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. And I will be going to this game. I'm very excited. Prosper is already, it's Monday night when I'm taping this. I've already got confirmation. They've approved my credentials. They're excited. I'm excited. They even said I get a box lunch. How great is that in my confirmation email to know I'm going to get a box lunch? I don't know what's going to be in the box. It could be chicken, it could be a sandwich. Who knows? But I will get a box of food to enjoy watching Paradise and Whitesboro. So I look forward to hopefully getting to meet some of you fans and people in there. I'll go down on the field and wave at everybody and check that out. I'm very excited to see this game from, I know Paradise and Whitesboro both have listeners and people who give feedback. I got to see Paradise earlier this year, so this is my second time to see Paradise. First time to see Whitesboro, although I got to see some Whitesboro people at the Brock game against Gunter. They were checking that out. And I hope if Whitesboro or Paradise and Brock play next week, I will be going to check out that game too, most likely. I don't know where Brock and Paradise would play. That's kind of a weird where do you meet in the middle? So they'd probably have to draw a triangle. Maybe Farrington Field in Fort Worth. Maybe get that downtown. I think that'd be a beautiful stadium. But who knows where they would take it. I hope they don't take it to Globe Life because y'all deserve better than Globe Life as far as having a good football experience. I guess maybe y'all be looking at the 7-day outlook, Paradise and Whitesboro coaches, to determine what looks good. And then if obviously if you're playing Bushland, it's probably going to be in Wichita Falls or even maybe up to Vernon, depending on if it's Paradise or Whitesboro and where along 287 you want to meet up and what stadiums are available. But we're hoping the District 4 3A report makes no apologies. We're not cheering for Bushland. We're absolutely cheering for the District 4 3A. But between Paradise and Whitesboro, we'll find out who is the better team. And I think the bigger point I was trying to make about Paradise before I just started talking and ranting on my own is Paradise did not have both of their running backs in that game. Austin Iglesias was pretty much the go-to back in the game against Whitesboro. He carried 10 times for only 7 yards. Hunter Sutton 4 for 2, and Isaiah Jennings 3 carries for 8 yards. But you didn't see Will Johnson, you didn't see Leo Hernandez, and both of those running backs are back for Paradise. So that gives a little bit more depth. And obviously, when you had a situation where Whitesboro ran 64 plays and had just thorough dominance on the ground, and Paradise only had 33 plays, Whitesboro obviously played a lot better in those conditions and were better suited to those conditions. I think in this game that Matt Harper is going to have a better game than he did against Paradise. Now, that's not to say that it's the first time. Now, that's not to say that, that was probably game plan. You can't really, chunk it down the field in a driving rainstorm. And I think the goal was to, just check downs, short, safe plays. You want to minimize turnovers in that kind of a game. But we saw against Paradise and even Brock to a certain extent. Paradise, I think, has defense is most susceptible in the secondary. And so I think Mac Harper has a really good opportunity to have a big game. Now, that's not to say they won't stick with the rushing attack, because the rushing attack has worked, and they were able to grind out that kind of a win. But I think the big difference as the adjustments go, I think Paradise is going to try to load the box a little bit more and try to keep that running game, because when you watch Grayson Ledbetter just take it to the house and gash you for 7 to 8 yards every single time he touches the ball, you try to make that sort of adjustment. So I think that's going to open up Mac Harper to potentially have a good game. For Paradise, I think it's going to be about the running game. Can the running game get on track for obviously more than a yard a carry, which is what they were able to get against Whitesboro last time? And we've seen over the last 4 or 5 weeks that Whitesboro has played incredibly well against the run. And if Paradise can't get the run game going, they're cooked. I mean, in my opinion, they are absolutely done in this game. I think just the way the matchups work, Whitesboro, even more so than Paradise versus Brock, I think Whitesboro is just not a good matchup for Paradise. I think Whitesboro is going to win this game relatively easy, 28-10 kind of game. I think, 2-3 scores. I think Mac Harper, when challenged, will have the great game as far as however the game plan needs him to be. Obviously, if Coach Fagan believes that the run game is what they should go with, that's what they will do. And he won't need to have to go downfield and hit big bombs. But the rushing game is going to be there for Whitesboro. I think even if Paradise loads up, I just don't see many situations where Paradise has improvement mechanisms. They're going to have more depth in the running game, and I think that will help them. But I just don't see them matching up very well against Whitesboro, who's just peaking at the right time. The big thing is going to be turnovers, of course. If Whitesboro has one of those days where none of the receivers, that ball just feels to has that little slippery component to it, and they just can't hang on to it, center exchanges that are problematic, that's really where Paradise, has, they got to generate some turnovers. And Paradise, from what I saw, is just not a turnover-generating team. That isn't to say they haven't worked on it, won't work on it, won't have the day, or Whitesboro might not make some unforced errors. But Paradise, to me, has got to generate the 2 to 3 turnovers and play a perfect game themselves to overcome the deficiency in talent between Whitesboro and Paradise. So that'll be what I'm watching, but I'm very excited to see that game. A little bit more of a game that, I think you can make an argument back and forth for is Bushland versus Brock. Brock is obviously playing its best football right now. They've gotten better. That's what the 4 games in the off-season really got them prepared for in the non-district, not really off-season, whatever you'd like to call it. And you see those teams still playing. You see Wimberley and Texarkana Pleasant Grove. Texarkana Pleasant Grove is playing Aubrey this week. I talked about that in the DFW podcast. And then you've got, Wimberley continuing to play well. And you've got Wichita Falls Hershey is playing Glen Rose this week. And you've got Gunter. Gunter is a prohibitive favorite to win 3A Division II. So the teams that Brock played are legit and are continuing on in the playoffs. So Brock obviously tested itself, and the 0-4 started out with, and we talked about how it was unfair. And I think in a way it really tainted Dave Campbell's and everybody's impression of this district, because Brock at 0-4, most people agreed that Brock was going to be the top team in this district, so they ignored Paradise and they ignored Whitesboro, subsequently disrespecting them in their poor rankings of those 2 teams because they didn't want to acknowledge how good Brock was. And you can see Brock winning by 5 scores in the playoffs. Brock is going to be just fine. But Bushland provides an interesting matchup for them. We saw Bushland against Jim Ned, that Jim Ned was able to pretty much keep that running game at bay. And obviously Brock is going to have a better defense than Jim Ned did. So I think that that they're not going to be able to, Bushland's not going to be able to run the way that they would like to run. And I'm sure they'll try, and, we'll see them try to see how it paces out very early. But I think it's going to be on Dawson Jaco and his arm to beat Brock. And he obviously has the talent to do that. But when Shallow Water played a similar game and said, okay, Dawson, you're the one who's got to beat us, that's the game they lost. And I think that Brock matches up very well as far as that goes. We see Bushland as a team that will make turnovers, but so will Brock. We've talked about Brock's inability to play a clean game. In fact, they're 12 games in, and there's only been one game where they've had no turnovers, and the rest have been one or two turnovers, and even more in games. So Brock is a lot of self-inflicted wounds, and we saw Bushland with 14 penalties for 115 yards this week. And you look at Brock and you see a similar number, 13 for 120 yards. So can Brock play past these mistakes? And we talked about it in our thorough analysis of Brock versus Whitesboro, that Brock has shown the consistency to where they're going to give up 7 to 10 points in some sort of fashion, whether it's a kickoff return or a timely penalty or something there is going to cost them 7 to 10 points, and they're going to have to overcome that. But again, in learning about Bushland, they have kind of the same problem. So I think these two things offset each other. And then when I look at the talent on the field, I think Brock has more talent on the field than Bushland. But it's going to be one of those 38 to 35 games like Whitesboro, a one-score game most likely, assuming it's relatively clean. Obviously, if Brock is able to get a couple of turnovers early on Bushland, they might get up 21-0 and not look back. But if Bushland gets the turnovers and gets the mistakes and plays their clean football game, and they allow Dawson Jaco to just basically pick apart some of the weaknesses and have the time to find his receivers, I think that's where Bushland's pathway to winning. But I really like that front four of Brock, and I don't think that Dawson is going to be able to have that kind of game where he can look downfield and get the ball downfield, which means he's going to have to throw it out in the flat and the short passes, which is very much like the running game, which is what Brock completely shuts down. Not completely shuts down. Obviously, you look at Texarkana, Pleasant Grove, they were able to run the ball, but Bushland is not Texarkana, Pleasant Grove. Bushland is not a 4A D2 top five team in the state. So I think that against Bushland, Brock should be a favorite. I think it's going to be a close game. I think it'll be a one-score game. If it's more than one score, it'll be because Brock overachieved. And if Bushland finds her way, I think we're going to look back at penalties and we're going to look back at turnovers and go, why couldn't Brock get that cleaned up at any point in the season? They've had 12 games now, and it's become a trend. But Brock, again, is playing fantastic level football on the defensive side of the ball. The offense looks like it's getting in tempo a lot quicker to where, Tyler Moody is just asked to be a gatekeeper, kind of like your Carson Rush, or your Cooper Rush. I don't know who Carson Rush is. He might be a late night talk show host, but you got Cooper Rush, and when Cooper Rush is in the game for the Cowboys, you just want smart plays, and of course you want to take deep shots, but they have to be deep shots. You don't want to throw into triple coverage just to get a ball down the field. And Tyler Moody, you can just see with these statistics, he's playing that way. He's embracing the role of not trying to force a play and not trying to force things down the field. Take what's there and be a good game manager and limit those turnovers, because obviously Brock has had a problem. So I do think we will see a District 4 3A rematch, and I do think that District 4 3A regional final will be the same regional final as last year. I think we're going to see Whitesboro and Brock, and if that is the case, I would love to see that game again, given how the first game went. And I could reserve the right to change my mind as far as back and forth, but I think right now I'd be leaning toward Whitesboro in a rematch. But again, I have to see if both teams can even get there, and if both teams can get there, how they perform at this regional semifinal level. But Whitesboro right now, I love how that defense is playing. There's never a question about the offense. The offense is going to get that 400 to 500 yards, and they got it against Brock as well. So it's their defense, and we saw Brock have multiple problems against Paradise, which, arguably they should have lost that game. How the 4 games that they played earlier this year, and then the Whitesboro game. And again, Brock could beat Bushland 52-3, kind of like they beat Jim Ned last year. I watched South Oak Cliff this week figure it out. Like just one week, they've been that sleeping giant, and all of a sudden they got a new quarterback in there. They put their best defensive player in as a change of pace running back, and all of a sudden South Oak Cliff flipped the light switch, and they look like a completely different team. I'm still waiting for Brock to flip the light switch because I don't think they're playing their best football, and I haven't seen a game yet. Even in these blowouts, I haven't seen a game yet where Brock just looks like the Brock I expected. Whitesboro is playing at their ceiling, and they are playing a consistently high level, and they are pushing past their ceiling and getting better every single week, and you can see that in their performances. Brock, you just kind of look and you scratch your head, and you're like, where is the Brock? Where is this dominant Brock Lesnar like wrestling thing? And Brock's one thing I love about Brock is they have a theme in the playoffs, and their theme is wrestling. So instantly warming my heart as far as that goes. But I still look at this team as having an extra level that they just haven't hit. That overgear, the turbo. You talk about a racing car, and you get the turbo button, and they go into that next level. Brock is built with a turbo button, but they haven't found how to hit it yet. So at any point it could come on, and Brock could be the Brock we're expecting. But Brock, at this level of Brock, is not the kind of a team that is unbeatable. And Whitesboro, given that they've gotten better, you take that game out of Brock and put it in a neutral field. I think that, again, right now, as of today, if they were playing today, I would be picking Whitesboro over Brock. But one more week, but it would be close. It'd be a one-score game either way. So I think I would trend towards Whitesboro. But I have definitely made many changes where in 1 week, all of a sudden, it's a 14-point turnaround. This week was South Oak Cliff. I keep mentioning it. I would have thought that I would have picked them against Midlothian Heritage as a pretty prohibitive underdog, whoever won this game. And now I think South Oak Cliff is probably going to win their game by 2 to 3 scores because they hit that turbo button. They figured it out. So if Brock is able to figure out, I'll be interested in the components of them figuring it out and kind of what's changed. But definitely Brock at their best is the best team in this region. But again, I haven't seen them play at their best. And whoever wins that game in District 4-3A, the District 4-3A Super Bowl, if you will, they will move on, and they'll probably be a bit of an underdog against whoever they play in Region 2. The regional semifinals over there, you have Pottsboro and Grandview, and you have West versus Malakoff, our good friend Pottsboro, who Whitesboro is already familiar with. So Whitesboro now has, we talked about how Brock has the 4 games against teams. All 4 of their losses are still in the playoffs. Well, Pottsboro's 2 big wins are still in the playoffs. We still have Bells and we still have Pottsboro. I think we'll say goodbye to Pottsboro this week. I don't think we'll say goodbye to Bells till next week. They play Gunter. Although Holiday this week will give them a pretty good tussle, but I think we're destined for the Bells and Gunter rematch, just like I feel like we were destined for the Whitesboro and Brock rematch. But Pottsboro plays Grandview and West plays Malakoff. And again, I kind of explained this, another reason where I thought the Dave Campbell's rankings were off is that a lot of these teams have played each other in certain ways. That you have West and Grandview are in the same district, and they played each other in district, and West defeated Grandview. Grandview played Malakoff already, and Grandview defeated Malakoff. So I don't know what's changed to where people think Malakoff is now the number 1 or number 2 team in the state based on the fact that they've already played Grandview and they've already lost to Grandview. They beat everybody in their district by a big number, but everybody in their district is gone. So it's not like a situation where you look at their district and go, oh, like the District 4-3A, and you look at that and you go, oh, well, look at all these teams that are still in there. You have Teague. They lost in the first round. You have Mejia. They lost in the first round. And you have, what's the other team in there? You had Teague. You have Fairfield. And Fairfield lost in the first round. And they all pretty much got blown out. So it's not a situation where you look at Malakoff going, wow, look at all these incredible teams in their district that they played. I just don't think Malakoff is as good as a lot of people think. And I think West will beat them this week. But if Malakoff finds that light switch, obviously this is a team that has been there, state championship experience, big runs, but West has a really good defense, and they have a very timely offense. So I'm taking West over Malakoff, and I'm taking Grandview over Pottsboro, and I think we'll have another district rematch with Grandview and West playing in the regional final. So that will do it for the District 4 3A report, the Thanksgiving edition. And you should really be grateful about the fact that we get to have Thanksgiving football, not for one, not for two, but for three teams. If this were the District 1 4A report, we would have been done 2 weeks ago. But as the District 4 3A report, we are guaranteed 4 rounds deep, no matter what happens. Even if the worst case scenario happens, we're guaranteed those 2 weeks. And as I've said, I think we could see very likely a state semifinal and we'll definitely see a state semifinal if we have Whitesboro Brock regional final, and then potentially a state championship game. As you look at the teams that are left, and obviously Whitesboro has that experience. They've already beat Pottsboro, and Brock has big game experience. They obviously played Mount Vernon last year, and Mount Vernon lost to West this year. So I think the team coming out of Region 2 will be a little bit better, whether it's Malakoff West, Grandview, or Pottsboro. I probably rank them, like I said, the way they played each other: West, Grandview, Malakoff, Pottsboro, in that order. Based on the fact that they've already played each other, but obviously it's the playoffs, things happen. I've seen plenty of upsets. Just this past week, Lancaster lost a game. They were up 21-0. They lost 30-27 in overtime, and the scores for Frisco Reedy against Lancaster was an onside kick that Lancaster tried to do when they were up big. That got returned for a touchdown. 2 pick sixes and a third interception that was basically a pick six. They ran it back to the 2 or 3 yard line and scored a couple of plays later. And ultimately, it was a situation where Lancaster almost tripled their yardage, but they lost the game. These things happen in the playoffs. These things happen in football. So obviously we're to a point now where everybody's good and everybody has an opportunity, if their opponent doesn't play their best game, to take advantage of it. So I don't like to, I talk about clean games and what should happen. And those are what are, and sometimes with teams like Brock, you kind of get to build in a turnover because of the consistency and their inconsistency. But I think Bushland and Brock both have that. I'd be very shocked if we saw a 0-0 turnover game. It might be 2-2 on both sides, but I think they'll cancel each other out, and Brock will ultimately get that win. And I think Paradise will have to get the 2 to 3 turnovers to have a chance against Whitesboro, who's playing at that very high level. So I'm taking, in Region 1, I'm taking Whitesboro and I'm taking Brock. And in Region 2, I'm taking Grandview and I'm taking West. For what it's worth, if you're looking at the rest of the bracket, really the team to watch out with on the bottom half is Franklin. That's kind of the big dog, and that's where Franklin, it's the team most likely to make it to the regional finals out of Region 1 is that Franklin team, because they've already had the experience of beating a team like Cameron Yo. So we'll have to find out if they can do it again. And that's its own special show over there. So thank you for tuning in to a Thanksgiving episode of the District 4 3A report. Hope to get this out early so people can listen before they start to have fun with their family. Chance, why don't you go ahead and get that music going, get those woos ready to go, because the road goes on forever and that party never ends. See you down the road.
Woo, 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 woo. I ain't leaving.